You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. The scar tissue never stops burning. 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days since they carved the sacred laws into my flesh, and the pain hasn't dulled even slightly. The black ink runs deeper than skin, deeper than muscle, etched into my very bones with needles blessed in the blood of martyrs, and dipped in ink, mixed from holy water and the cremated remains of saints who died screaming. My name is Daniel Crane, and I'm property of the Vatican's Section 7. Before the church claimed me, I was nobody special. A third-year seminary student at St. Bartholomew's in upstate New York, preparing for a life of quiet service in some rural parish. I had dreams of helping people, of bringing comfort to the sick and guidance to the lost. I believed in goodness, in the power of faith to heal the world's wounds. That innocence died on a Tuesday night in October, when something ancient and hungry decided to pay our seminary a visit. I remember every detail of that night with perfect clarity, though I wish I didn't. The way the temperature dropped 20 degrees in a matter of minutes. The way the crucifixes on the walls began to turn upside down by themselves. The way Father Morrison's face changed when the thing wearing his body turned to look at us during evening prayer. It started with Brother Thomas, the youngest of our group. 20 years old, fresh from Minnesota farm country, with the kind of earnest faith that made even the cynical among us want to believe again. The entity took him first, sliding into his body like water flowing into a vessel. One moment he was kneeling in prayer, the next he was standing with his head twisted backward, black tears streaming from eyes that now looked in the wrong direction. "God cannot save you here," he said in a voice that belonged to something far older than Christianity. "God has never been here at all." What followed was 7 hours of systematic slaughter. The entity moved from body to body, collecting them like trophies, making each new host kill the next victim before claiming them as well. It forced me to watch every death, every transformation, holding me in place with invisible chains while my friends and teachers became puppets in its cosmic performance. Father Morrison was the last to fall. I watched the thing wearing Brother Thomas's backward face corner him in the chapel, saw the moment when understanding dawned in the old priest's eyes. He tried to perform an exorcism, speaking words of banishment in Latin that had been old when Rome was young. The entity laughed at him, a sound like glass breaking in a cathedral. "Your rituals have no power here," it said through Thomas's mouth. "They were written by men who never understood the true nature of what they were fighting. But someone does understand. Someone has been watching, learning, preparing." Father Morrison died screaming, his body convulsing as the entity forced its way inside. When the transformation was complete, he turned to me with that same backward face, those same black tears. "You," he said, "you will remember all of this. You will carry the knowledge of what happened here, and someday someone will come for you. Someone who understands the true purpose of what you've witnessed." Then the building exploded. That was the official story anyway. A gas leak in the basement, they said. A tragic accident that claimed 37 lives. I was found 3 days later in the ruins of the chapel, catatonic and covered in symbols that had been carved into the walls with human fingernails. The investigators assumed I'd done it myself, in my trauma-induced delirium. They were wrong. The symbols were instructions left by the entity for whoever would come to claim me. The psychiatric ward at St. Mary's Hospital became my home for the next 6 months. I didn't speak. didn't eat unless forced, didn't acknowledge the existence of the world around me. The doctors diagnosed me with severe PTSD and recommended long-term institutionalization. My parents, devout Catholics, who'd been so proud of their son's calling to the priesthood, visited once and never returned. Cardinal Torretti changed everything. He arrived on a rain-soaked Thursday morning in April, a small man with eyes like chips of obsidian and hands that never stopped moving. He sat beside my bed in the locked ward and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, as if he was afraid someone might be listening. "Tell me what you saw, Daniel." I'd been silent for months, but something in his tone broke through the wall I'd built around my memories. "It wore Father Morrison's face," I said, "but it wasn't him. It was something else, something hungry. It killed them all one by one and made me watch. A demon. More than that, older. It had been waiting in the seminary for decades, feeding on faith until it was strong enough to take physical form. It said someone was watching, learning. It said someone would come for me." Cardinal Torretti nodded, as if this was perfectly normal. "And you survived because you didn't run?" "I couldn't run. I was paralyzed with terror." "No," he said, leaning closer. "You didn't run because you understood. You saw it for what it truly was, and your mind didn't break completely. That makes you valuable, Daniel. That makes you one of us." He explained about Section 7 over the course of several visits, a division of the Vatican that officially didn't exist, tasked with hunting entities that the Church couldn't acknowledge in public. Demons, fallen angels, ancient gods that had learned to wear human faces. They were all real, all active, all growing stronger as the world grew more faithless. "We've been fighting this war for over 1,000 years, he told me. "Behind the scenes, in the shadows, using methods that would horrify the faithful if they knew. But it's necessary work, Daniel. Without us, the darkness would have consumed everything long ago." He showed me photographs from other incidents. A boarding school in Vermont where the children had started speaking in tongues and bleeding from their eyes. A monastery in Oregon where the monks had been found arranged in ritualistic patterns, their bodies drained of blood but showing no wounds. A convent in Texas where 7 nuns had simply vanished, leaving behind only their habits and the smell of sulfur. "Each case follows patterns," Cardinal Torretti explained, "rules that govern how these entities operate in our world. Learn the rules, follow them precisely, and you can defeat even the most powerful demon. Break them and you become part of their collection." 3 weeks later, they brought me to a medical facility hidden in the sub-basement of Vatican City. The journey there was a blur of private jets and unmarked cars, culminating in a descent through passages that seemed to burrow into the earth itself. The facility was older than the city above it, its stone walls carved with symbols that predated Christianity by millennia. The doctor was an elderly nun named Sister Agatha, her hands steady despite her advanced age. She explained the procedure while preparing instruments that looked more like torture devices than medical tools. "The rules must become part of you," she said, selecting a needle that gleamed like liquid silver, "not memorized but inscribed into your very being. The demons we hunt are ancient and cunning. They can cloud minds, alter memories, make you forget everything you know, but they cannot change what is written in flesh and blood." "The needles were blessed," she explained. "Forged from silver taken from crucifixes that had been present at authenticated miracles, dipped in ink mixed with holy water from Lourdes and the cremated remains of saints who had died in battle against the darkness. Each one had to be consecrated separately, blessed by 3 different priests in 3 different languages. The pain is part of the process," Sister Agatha said as she prepared the first needle. "Suffering sanctifies the flesh, makes it resistant to demonic influence. You must remain conscious throughout the entire procedure, or the consecration will fail." The tattooing took 18 hours. I was conscious for every moment, as was required by church law. Each letter was agony, each word a fire that burned through my nervous system and into my soul. By the time they finished, I understood why so few people volunteered for Section 7. Most couldn't survive the consecration. Those who did were changed forever. The rules covered my torso, back and arms in precise Latin script, each line perfectly straight, each letter formed with religious precision. 12 commandment that would keep me alive in the war against the possessed, written in my own flesh. Rule 1, ingredere tantum in hora completorii. Enter only during the hour of Compline, between 9 and 10 in the evening. The demons were strongest during the small hours of the night, but they were also most vulnerable during the transition from day to darkness. Compline was the last prayer of the monastic day, the moment when the faithful surrendered themselves to sleep and dreams. It was the only time when the barrier between worlds was thin enough to allow passage but stable enough to ensure return. Rule 2, nulla verba sacra intra parietes corruptos. Speak no sacred words within corrupted walls. Prayer and scripture could become weapons in the hands of the possessed, turned against the faithful, and used to strengthen the very evil they were meant to banish. I had seen what happened to operatives who carried crucifixes into haunted ground. Their own faith became a noose around their necks. Rule 3, possessi vultus suos retrorsum gerunt. The possessed wear their faces backwards. This was not metaphor, but literal truth. Demonic possession reversed the natural order of the body, turning the face 180 degrees while leaving the rest of the anatomy unchanged. It was a sign of the inversion of the soul, the corruption of God's image. Rule 4, argentum te benedictum cor penetrat. Silver blessed thrice pierces the heart. Only silver that had been consecrated by 3 different priests in 3 separate ceremonies could destroy a possessed body. The metal had to be pure, the blessings had to be sincere, and the strike had to be true. 1 blessing was insufficient, 2 was dangerous, and 4 or more would corrupt the silver's power entirely. Rule 5, numera gressus eorum semper tridecim faciunt. Count their footsteps, they always take 13. This was perhaps the most important rule, the one that had saved more operatives than any other. The possessed were bound by cosmic laws that forced them to move in patterns of 13. 13 steps forward, 13 backward, 13 to the left or right. Count the steps, predict the movement, and you could stay ahead of even the fastest demon. Rule 6, lacrimant sanguinem atrum cum mors appropinquat. They weep tears of black blood when death approaches. As a possessed body began to fail, as the silver worked its way toward the heart, the entity would lose control of its host's tear ducts. The black blood was not blood at all, but something else, something that burned like acid and smelled like flowers, left too long in a vase. Rule 7, nunquam directe in cruces inversas eorum aspice. Never look directly into their inverted crosses. Every possessed being bore this mark, carved deep into the flesh of their forehead. To look upon it directly was to invite madness, to open your mind to the very entity you were trying to destroy. Peripheral vision was safer, though even that carried risks. Rule 8, mater per juniorem primum loquitur. The mother speaks through the youngest first. In cases of group possession, the entity always began with the youngest victim, using their innocence as a foothold in our world. Kill the youngest first, and you could sometimes break the chain before it spread to the others. Wait too long, and the entire group would be lost. Rule 9. Aqua benedicta eos urit, sed celeriores facit. Holy water burns them, but makes them faster. This was a tactical consideration that had cost many operatives their lives. While blessed water caused tremendous pain to the possessed, it also triggered a berserker rage that made them far more dangerous. Use it to distract or disable, never as a primary weapon. Rule 10. Aquam correntem transire non possunt. They cannot cross running water. This was an ancient law, older than Christianity itself. The possessed were bound to the earth they corrupted, unable to cross natural barriers like rivers or streams. Unfortunately, most modern buildings lacked such defences, making this rule useful primarily for escape routes. Rule 11. Corpus hospitis ante medium noctem tertiae die destruere. Destroy the host body before midnight of the third day. After 72 hours, the possession became permanent, the human soul completely consumed by the invading entity. The body would continue to function, but the person inside would be gone forever, their consciousness devoured to fuel the demon's presence in our world. Rule 12. Septima monaca veram formam matris gerit. The seventh nun carries the mother's true form. This was the most terrifying rule, reserved for the most dangerous types of possession. Some entities were too powerful to inhabit a single body, requiring multiple hosts to contain their essence. The seventh victim would house the core consciousness, making them exponentially more dangerous than their predecessors. After the tattooing was complete, they gave me 3 days to recover before beginning my training. The facility had ranges for weapons practice, libraries filled with texts that would have been burned as heretical in any other context, and cells containing things that had once been human, but were now something else entirely. My instructor was Father Voss, a man who had been hunting demons for longer than I'd been alive. He was covered in scars, each one a reminder of battles fought in the shadows of the world. His left arm was missing below the elbow, claimed by something he called a weeping angel in a cathedral in Prague. The rules are absolute, he told me during my first lesson. Never bend them, never ignore them, never assume you know better. I've seen operatives with decades of experience die because they thought they'd found an exception. There are no exceptions, Daniel. Only death. He taught me to fight with blessed silver, to move silently through sacred spaces, to recognize the signs of possession before they became obvious. More importantly, he taught me to think like a demon, to understand the alien logic that governed their behavior. They're not evil in the way humans understand evil, he explained during one of our sessions. They're alien. Their minds work according to laws we can barely comprehend. What seems like malice to us is simply their nature, like a shark hunting or a spider spinning its web. Understanding that difference is what separates the survivors from the casualties. My first mission came 3 months later. A small parish in rural Kansas where the priest had started speaking in tongues during Mass, and the congregation had begun displaying stigmata. It was a simple case, Father Voss assured me. A single possessed clergyman, no complications, an ideal training scenario. I killed Father Henley with a blessed silver knife through the heart, watching as his backward face dissolved into ash. The process was exactly as the rules described, from his 13-step approach to the black tears that marked his impending death. It should have felt like a victory, a life saved from damnation. Instead, it felt like murder. You'll get used to it, Father Voss said afterward. The doubt, the guilt, the sense that you're doing something fundamentally wrong. Those feelings fade with time. They have to, or you'll go insane. He was right. Over the following 3 years, I cleaned 17 infestations, possessed priests in rural parishes, corrupted monks in isolated monasteries, a boarding school run by nuns where the children started speaking in tongues and bleeding from their eyes. Each mission followed the same pattern: arrive, assess, eliminate the possessed, file a report that would be sealed and forgotten. I was good at it, perhaps too good. The scars on my flesh had become roadmaps of horror, and I could read them like scripture. The rules had never failed me, never led me astray. They were absolute, immutable, carved into my very being by divine will. Father Rodriguez in New Mexico, his face turned backward as he tried to bless bread that turned to maggots in his hands. Sister Mary Catherine in Oregon, weeping black tears as she strangled novices with rosary beads. Brother Timothy in Montana, speaking Latin backwards while carving inverted crosses into his own forehead. Each death was precisely as the rules predicted. Each killing followed the established pattern. The possessed always took 13 steps, always wept black blood when death approached, always dissolved into ash when struck through the heart with blessed silver. The consistency should have been comforting. Instead, it began to trouble me in ways I couldn't articulate. In quiet moments between missions, I found myself wondering about the patterns, about the rigid adherence to rules that seemed almost choreographed. But doubt was dangerous in my line of work. I pushed the questions aside and focused on the mission, on the sacred duty that had been carved into my flesh. The church needed me. The world needed me. The darkness was always growing, always spreading, and only operatives like me stood between civilization and chaos. That confidence would be my undoing. The envelope arrived on a cold Thursday morning in February, delivered by a courier who disappeared into the Roman crowds before I could get a good look at his face. Inside was a photograph of St. Agatha's Convent in rural Montana, along with a dossier that made my blood run cold. 7 nuns, all possessed simultaneously. The entity responsible was something called the Weeping Mother, a demon so ancient that references to it appeared in texts predating Christianity itself. According to the file, it was a collector, a being that fed on faith and innocence, growing stronger with each soul it consumed. The photographs were horrifying. 7 women in nuns' habits, their faces turned backward, standing in perfect formation around an altar that had been carved with symbols I recognized from my seminary nightmares. Black tears streamed from their reversed eyes, pooling on the floor in patterns that hurt to look at directly, but it was the final page of the dossier that truly unsettled me. A handwritten note from Cardinal Torretti, written in his precise script. "Third day approaches. This one is different, Daniel. The entity is older than our records, more powerful than anything we've encountered before. Follow the rules exactly, make no deviations, and remember that some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. Be careful." I spent 2 days preparing, longer than usual for what should have been a straightforward elimination. The blessed silver weapons were crafted by Father McKenna, a former military chaplain who understood the balance between lethality and sanctity. Each knife was consecrated separately by 3 different priests, as the rules demanded. The crossbow bolts were blessed at dawn, noon, and dusk, ensuring they would hold their power against even the strongest demonic forces. No holy symbols, no religious texts, no items that could trigger Rule 2. I'd seen what happened to operatives who carried crucifixes into corrupted ground. The possessed could turn faith against you, make your own beliefs a weapon in their hands. The flight to Montana took 8 hours, giving me time to study the convent's history. St. Agatha's had been founded in 1874 by a group of Irish nuns fleeing religious persecution. The building itself was constructed from local stone, its Gothic architecture a deliberate echo of the great cathedrals of Europe. The convent had a dark history though, 3 previous incidents over the past century and a half, each involving unexplained deaths and disappearances. In 1923, 2 nuns had been found dead in their cells, their bodies drained of blood but showing no wounds. In 1967, the entire community had vanished overnight, leaving behind only their habits and the smell of sulfur. In 1994, a fire had gutted the east wing, killing 5 sisters who had barricaded themselves inside the chapel. Each incident had been covered up, explained away as accidents or natural causes. But reading between the lines of the official reports, I could see the truth. Something had been feeding at St. Agatha's for generations, growing stronger with each meal. Something had finally grown strong enough to claim the entire community at once. I rented a car in Billings and drove the final 100 miles through landscape that grew increasingly desolate as I approached the convent. The road wound through pine forests and rocky hills, past abandoned homesteads and rusted mining equipment left over from Montana's gold rush days. The few people I saw gave me suspicious looks, the kind reserved for outsiders who brought trouble with them. The local sheriff had stopped by the convent 3 days earlier, responding to reports of strange lights and sounds. He'd found the building empty, the nuns gone, no signs of struggle or violence, just 7 habits laid out neatly in the chapel, as if their occupants had simply evaporated. Strangest damn thing I ever saw, he'd told the FBI agents who'd taken over the case. Place felt wrong, you know, like something bad had happened there, something that left a stain on the air itself. The FBI had cordoned off the area and declared it a crime scene, but they'd found nothing useful. No fingerprints, no DNA evidence, no indication of where 7 women could have vanished to. After a week of fruitless investigation, they'd handed the case over to the Vatican's liaisons, who had quietly made it disappear from official records. St. Agatha's sat on a hill overlooking the Yellowstone River, its twin spires reaching toward a sky that seemed unnaturally dark despite the early evening hour. The building was larger than I'd expected, a sprawling complex of interconnected structures built from grey stone that looked almost black in the fading light. The windows should have been glowing with warm lamplight, but instead they were dark, as if someone had painted them over from the inside. More disturbing still, the stained glass windows that should have depicted scenes from the life of Christ now showed images of suffering and torment, rendered in impossible detail. I parked a mile away and walked the rest of the distance, timing my approach carefully. The tattoos on my chest had started burning the moment I crossed the county line, a sure sign that I was approaching something profoundly evil. Now, as I climbed the hill toward the convent, the pain was almost unbearable. The building itself seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if something vast and hungry was breathing just beneath its stone skin. The air grew thick and heavy as I approached, pressing against my lungs like molasses. Even the wind seemed wrong, carrying whispers in languages that predated human speech. Rule 1 was absolute. I could only enter during the Hour of Compline, the final prayer service of the monastic day. 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, no exceptions. I'd seen what happened to operatives who tried to bend that rule. Their bodies were usually found days later, turned inside out, and arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. At exactly 9:15, I reached the convent's main entrance. The heavy wooden doors were unlocked, which should have been my first warning. In 17 previous missions, I'd never encountered possessed beings who made things easy for their hunters. The interior was a maze of stone corridors and wooden floors, polished smooth by decades of use. Electric lights had been installed sometime in the 20th century, but they weren't working. Instead, the hallways were lit by candles that burned with flames, too steady, too bright, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. The shadows were wrong. They twisted and writhed like living things, reaching across walls and ceilings with a purposefulness that made my skin crawl. Some of them seemed to be watching me, following my progress through the corridors with an intelligence that shadows shouldn't possess. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps and something that might have been weeping in the distance. The weeping grew louder as I moved deeper into the building, echoing off the stone walls in patterns that seemed almost musical. I followed the sound toward the chapel, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. But running wasn't an option. Not for someone like me. I had a job to do, rules to follow, sacred duty carved into my very flesh. The chapel doors were standing open, revealing an interior that had been transformed into something from a nightmare. The altar had been moved to one side, replaced by a circle of candles arranged around what looked like a summoning diagram carved directly into the stone floor. The symbols were familiar, variations of the same marks I'd seen carved into the walls of St. Bartholomew's Seminary 3 years earlier. She was kneeling in the centre of the circle. Sister Catherine was 26 years old according to her file, a former schoolteacher who had joined the order 4 years earlier after a profound religious experience. She was still wearing her habit, the white wool pristine despite the circumstances. Her head was bowed in what appeared to be prayer, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Sister?" I called softly. She raised her head and looked at me, and I saw the truth of Rule 3 made manifest. Her face had been rotated exactly 180 degrees, so that her eyes looked over her shoulder while her mouth moved where the back of her head should be. The effect was nauseating, a violation of human anatomy that made my mind recoil. But there was something else, something that made this different from the other possessions I'd encountered. Sister Catherine's backward face was beautiful, serene, almost angelic. There was no madness in her reversed eyes, no rage or hunger or desperation, just a peaceful acceptance that was somehow more terrifying than any display of demonic fury. "Daniel Crane," she said, her voice coming from behind her but perfectly synchronized with the movement of her backwards lips. "You're exactly on time." She stood with fluid grace and began walking toward me. I counted her steps automatically, a habit ingrained by years of following the rules. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. She stopped precisely 13 steps away, just as Rule 5 promised she would. "I know why you're here," she continued, and black tears began streaming from her reversed eyes. "The weeping mother has been expecting you." The blessed silver knife was in my hand, before I'd consciously decided to draw it. The blade had been consecrated that morning by Father McKenna, blessed at noon by Father Rodriguez, and sanctified at sunset by Father Chen, thrice blessed as Rule 4 demanded. Sister Catherine tilted her backwards head, studying me with eyes that held far too much intelligence. "You're going to kill me now." "I'm sorry," I whispered, and drove the knife into her heart. She screamed, but it wasn't a human sound. It was the cry of something vast and ancient, a noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and nowhere in particular. Her body didn't collapse the way I expected. Instead, it dissolved, the flesh and bone turning to ash that scattered across the chapel floor in patterns that looked almost like writing. The black tears evaporated as she died, leaving only the smell of sulphur and something else, something sweet and cloying that reminded me of flowers left too long in a vase. But underneath those scents was another odour, fainter but more disturbing. The smell of burning parchment, as if words themselves were being consumed by flame. 1 down, 6 to go. I found Sister Margaret in the convent's kitchen, standing before a massive stove that must have dated back to the building's construction. She was stirring something in a large pot, her backwards face turned towards the bubbling contents. The smell was indescribable, like meat left to rot in the sun, mixed with incense and something that might have been burning hair. The kitchen was wrong in ways that went beyond the obvious horror of her reversed features. The shadows moved independently of their sources, reaching across walls and ceiling like grasping fingers. The very air seemed thick with malevolence, pressing against my lungs and making it difficult to breathe. "Good evening, Daniel," she said without turning around. "I've been preparing dinner. The others will be so pleased to meet you." She began reciting the Pater Noster in perfect Latin, her backwards mouth forming each word with precise diction. It was a trap, an attempt to make me respond automatically, to break Rule 2 by speaking sacred words within corrupted walls. I'd seen operatives fall for similar ploys, their training overwhelmed by decades of religious conditioning. The temptation was stronger than I'd expected. The familiar words tugged at something deep in my consciousness, awakening memories of childhood prayers and seminary devotions. For a moment, I almost responded, almost let the Lord's Prayer spill from my lips in automatic response to her recitation. Instead, I drew a vial of holy water from my belt and threw it at her back. The blessed liquid struck her habit and she screamed, spinning around to face me. Where the water had touched, her clothing was smoking, the fabric dissolving to reveal skin that was blistered and raw. But she didn't slow down. If anything, she moved faster, her 13-step approach eating up the distance between us in seconds. Rule 9 was proving accurate once again. Holy water burned the possessed, but it also made them more dangerous. I dove to one side as she lunged, her fingernails extending into claws that gouged deep grooves in the wooden table where I'd been standing. My crossbow was already in my hands, loaded with a bolt that caught the flickering candlelight as I took aim. "You cannot stop what has already begun," she hissed, black blood flowing from her mouth. "The ritual approaches completion, and soon the door will open wide enough for her to pass through." "What ritual?" I demanded, but she only laughed. The bolt took her in the heart, and she dissolved just as Sister Catherine had, leaving only ash and the lingering smell of corruption. But her words echoed in my mind as I moved deeper into the convent. What ritual? What door? What was I really walking into? The building seemed larger now, its corridors stretching longer than they should have according to the architectural plans I'd memorized. Doors that had been locked were standing open, revealing rooms that hadn't existed in the original blueprints. The convent was changing around me, reshaping itself according to some alien geometry that hurt to contemplate. I found Sisters Joan and Elizabeth in the dormitory, their backwards faces turned toward each other in what appeared to be an intense conversation. They were sitting on opposite beds, their bodies mirror images of each other, moving with the same unsettling synchronization I'd observed in other group possessions. But there was something different about these two, something that made my scarred flesh burn with increased intensity. They weren't just possessed. They were connected, linked by invisible threads of malevolent energy that pulsed between them like a heartbeat. "He's here," Sister Joan said, her voice perfectly calm. "Just as she promised," Sister Elizabeth replied. "The Weeping Mother sees all paths, knows all outcomes, has prepared for every possibility, every contingency, every deviation, every rule." They stood simultaneously and began moving toward me, still perfectly synchronized. Every step was identical, every gesture a perfect reflection. It was like watching a single consciousness puppeting two bodies, and the effect was deeply disturbing. But it was more than synchronization. As they moved, I could see the air between them shimmering, as if reality itself was being distorted by their connection. The space around them seemed to bend and twist, creating optical illusions that made my eyes water and my head ache. I had 2 crossbow bolts remaining, and I'd need to use them both. The possessed had to be killed simultaneously, or the survivor would have time to react before I could reload. I waited until they were exactly 13 steps away, then fired both bolts in quick succession. The blessed silver found its mark in both cases, striking their hearts within milliseconds of each other. They collapsed together, their bodies dissolving into twin piles of ash that somehow seemed to move toward each other even as they scattered across the floor. But as they died, something passed between them, a flash of darkness that leaped from one dissolving form to the other, and then disappeared entirely. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a face in that darkness, ancient and terrible and familiar. 4 down, 3 to go. The next nun I encountered was different from the others in ways that made my training seem inadequate. Sister Helen was young, perhaps 22, with a kind of ethereal beauty that belonged in religious art. She was sitting in the Mother Superior's office, her backwards face turned toward a massive wooden desk covered in papers, candles, and what appeared to be ritual implements. The office itself was wrong. It was too large, for one thing, stretching back into shadows that seemed to have no end. The walls were covered with paintings that moved when I wasn't looking directly at them, depicting scenes of religious ecstasy that became something darker when glimpsed from the corner of my eye. "You're the youngest," I said, remembering Rule 8. "The mother speaks through you first." She laughed, a sound like crystal breaking in a cathedral. "The weeping mother has been watching your kind for longer than you can imagine, Daniel Crane. She knows about your tattoos, about your precious rules. She's been studying them, learning to work within their constraints. That's impossible. The rules are divine law." "Divine law written by mortal hands," she corrected, turning to face me fully. "Interpreted by human minds, enforced by flawed understanding. Do you really think something as ancient as the Weeping Mother couldn't find the loopholes?" She stood and began her 13-step approach, but there was something different about her movement. Each step was deliberate, measured, as if she was following a choreography that had been rehearsed countless times. More disturbing still, each footfall seemed to echo longer than it should have, the sound reverberating through dimensions I couldn't perceive. "Tell me something, Daniel," she said as she walked. "In all your missions, have you ever wondered why the entities you hunt always follow the rules so perfectly? Why they never deviate from the patterns described in your flesh?" The question hit me like a physical blow. She was right. In 17 missions, I'd never encountered a possessed being that broke the established patterns. They always took 13 steps, always wept black tears, always wore their faces backwards. It was as if they were following a script, performing roles in a play whose purpose I didn't understand. "Because they have to," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Because they choose to," Sister Helen corrected. "Because following your rules serves their purpose. Think about it, Daniel. What is the ultimate goal of any predator? To hunt, to feed," she said. "And what do predators need most to ensure a steady supply of prey?" I killed her before she could finish the thought, driving blessed silver through her heart with more force than necessary. But as her body dissolved, her laughter continued to echo through the office, a sound that seemed to burrow into my brain and take root there. The implications of her words were staggering. If the possessed were following the rules by choice rather than compulsion, then what did that say about the rules themselves? What did it say about my mission, my purpose, my very existence? 5 down, 2 to go. Sister Dorothy was waiting for me in the bell tower, her backwards face turned toward the window that looked out over the Montana wilderness. She was different from the others in subtle ways. Her posture was more natural, her movements less obviously choreographed. If not for the obvious signs of possession, she might have passed for human. "Beautiful view," she said without turning around. "You can see for miles from up here, all the way to the interstate, where travelers pass by without ever knowing what horrors lurk in this holy place." The bell tower was ancient, its stone walls carved with religious imagery that had been corrupted by whatever force now controlled the convent. Saints' faces had been altered to show expressions of torment. Angels' wings had been replaced with bat-like appendages, and everywhere I looked, I saw inverted crosses worked into the decorative patterns. She turned to face me, and I immediately noticed that she was walking backwards, her feet moving in reverse so that her rotated face appeared to be facing forward. It was clever, an attempt to confuse me, but I could still see the inverted cross carved deep into her forehead, the mark that branded her as possessed. "You're learning to adapt," I said, "but it won't save you." "Save me?" She smiled, an expression made grotesque by her reversed features. "Oh, Daniel, you still don't understand. We don't want to be saved. We want to be consumed by the Weeping Mother." by something far greater than you can comprehend. She began her 13-step approach, but each footfall seemed to create ripples in the air itself, as if reality was responding to her presence. Tell me, have you ever wondered why Section 7 exists at all? Why the Church maintains a division dedicated to hunting the possessed, to protect the faithful, to feed the hungry, she corrected. Every operative they send, every cleansing they perform, it all serves the same purpose. You're not exterminators, Daniel. You're shepherds, guiding the flock to slaughter. The accusation should have been easy to dismiss, but doubt was growing in my mind like a cancer. Too many things didn't add up. The perfect adherence to patterns, the ritualistic nature of each killing, the sense that I was playing a role in some vast cosmic performance. The Church fights evil, I said, but my conviction was wavering. The Church serves its own interests, Sister Dorothy replied, as it always has. Do you know how many operatives Section 7 has sent into the field over the past century? Do you know how many have returned? I didn't answer, but she seemed to read the question in my eyes. 137 agents, Daniel. 137 men and women, with rules tattooed into their flesh, sent to face the darkness armed with blessed silver and absolute faith. Do you know how many completed their missions and returned to report success? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. None, she whispered. Not one. They all died in the field, their bodies found days or weeks later, drained of life and arranged in ritualistic patterns. All except you, Daniel. You're the only one who's survived multiple missions, the only one who's proven capable of following the rules perfectly. That's not possible. I've filed reports, received new assignments. You've filed reports to empty offices, received assignments from entities that wear the faces of cardinals and bishops but serve different masters entirely. The real Vatican lost control of Section 7 decades ago, Daniel. What you serve now is something else, something that has been using the Church's authority to feed its own hunger. I killed her with the last of my blessed silver knives, but her words had already taken root. As her body dissolved into ash, I found myself questioning everything I'd believed about my mission, my purpose, my very existence. The knife felt different in my hand now, lighter somehow, as if it had lost some essential quality. I examined the blade closely and saw that the silver was beginning to tarnish, dark spots spreading across its surface like a disease. The blessed metal was losing its power, corrupted by my growing doubt. 6 down, 1 to go, but first I needed to understand what was really happening here. I spent the next hour exploring the convent, searching for clues about the true nature of my mission. What I found in the Mother Superior's private quarters made my blood run cold. Hidden behind a false wall was a collection of documents that should never have existed. Files on every Section 7 operative going back 50 years. Detailed reports on their missions and eventual fates. Personnel records for agents I'd never heard of. Men and women who had supposedly completed successful cleansings before disappearing without a trace. There were photographs too. Crime scene images showing the remains of operatives who had died in the field. Their bodies arranged in patterns that looked disturbingly familiar. The same symbols I'd seen carved into seminary walls, the same ritualistic positioning, the same evidence of something feeding on faith and flesh. But it was the final folder that truly shattered my understanding of everything I'd believed. Inside were architectural plans for dozens of religious institutions across the globe, each one marked with dates and casualty counts. Monasteries, convents, seminaries, all of them sites of cleansing operations that had ended in death and disappearance. St. Agatha's was marked differently than the others. Instead of a casualty count, it bore a single word written in Cardinal Toretti's precise handwriting: culmination. The convent seemed larger now, its corridors stretching impossibly long, its rooms multiplying like cancer cells. Doors that had been locked were standing open, revealing chambers that hadn't existed on the architectural plans. The building was changing around me, reshaping itself according to some alien geometry that hurt to contemplate. I descended into the crypt through a narrow stone staircase that hadn't been there an hour earlier. The air grew thick and heavy as I went deeper, pressing against my lungs like molasses. The tattoos on my skin were burning with such intensity that I could barely think straight, the pain threatening to overwhelm my consciousness entirely. The staircase seemed to go on forever, spiraling down through layers of stone that predated the convent by centuries. The walls were carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Religious imagery that had been corrupted into something blasphemous and wrong. Finally, I reached the bottom. The crypt was vast, far larger than the building above could possibly contain. Stone pillars stretched up into darkness, supporting a ceiling that seemed to go on forever. Candles burned in alcoves carved into the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows that moved with purpose and intelligence. But it was the altar that commanded attention. Made from what appeared to be human bones fused together into a structure that was both beautiful and horrifying, it stood at the center of the space like a monument to suffering. Around it, arranged in a perfect circle, were 7 stone tombs, each one bearing the name of a nun from St. Agatha's. At the center of the circle, kneeling before the bone altar, was Mother Superior Agnes. She was facing forward. Her features were normal, human, unmarked by possession. No backwards face, no inverted cross carved into her forehead, no black tears streaming from her eyes. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, an elderly nun at prayer. "Mother Superior," I called softly. She looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with a sadness so profound it made my chest ache. "Daniel Crane, I've been waiting for you. You're not possessed." "No, child, I'm not." She stood slowly, her movements those of an old woman with arthritis and a lifetime of kneeling in prayer. I summoned the weeping mother to this place. I called her here, invited her into our sanctuary, opened the door for her to enter our world. The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible. You're a servant of God." "I was," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "For 63 years, I served faithfully. I took my vows at 18, devoted my life to prayer and service. I believed in the righteousness of our cause, the divinity of our purpose. I never questioned, never doubted, never wavered in my faith." "Then why?" Mother Superior Agnes smiled, and it was the saddest expression I'd ever seen. "Because I learned the truth about Section 7, about what you really are, what you really do. The church doesn't send you to save the possessed, Daniel. They send you to complete the rituals." The crypt began to change around us, the walls weeping tears of black blood that pooled on the stone floor. The air grew thick with the smell of sulfur and decay, and something moved in the shadows between the pillars. "I discovered the truth 3 years ago," she continued, "when they sent Agent Martinez to deal with a possessed priest in our neighboring parish. I watched from hiding as he performed his cleansing, saw how the death ritual was conducted, understood what was really happening. Martinez is dead, killed by a demon in Colorado." "Martinez was sacrificed," she corrected, "just as they all are, eventually. The entities you hunt aren't random manifestations of evil, Daniel. They're cultivated, bred, fed on faith and innocence until they're ready for harvest. And you are the harvester. Every entity you've killed," she continued, "every demon you've banished, you didn't destroy them. You freed them from their physical constraints, allowed them to merge with their true forms. The possessed bodies were just cocoons, Daniel, temporary vessels holding the larvae until they were ready to emerge." "No," I said, but even as I spoke the denial, I knew she was telling the truth. It explained too much, the way the possessed, always followed the rules, the ritualistic nature of each killing, the sense that I was playing a role in some vast cosmic performance. The silver doesn't kill them, Mother Superior Agnes said. It transforms them. The blessed metal acts as a catalyst, converting matter into energy, allowing the entity to shed its physical form and ascend to a higher plane of existence. You've been midwifing demons, Daniel, helping them be born into their true power. Something vast stirred in the darkness behind the altar. The shadows began to coalesce, taking on weight and substance, forming into a shape that my mind struggled to process. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the ceiling that had seemed infinite just moments before. Its body was a writhing mass of shadow and bone, constantly shifting and changing, never quite settling into a single form. Its face was the worst part. It was a collection of all the nuns I'd killed, their features flowing and merging like water. Sister Catherine's eyes, Sister Margaret's mouth, Sister Joan's nose, Sister Elizabeth's chin, Sister Helen's cheekbones, Sister Dorothy's brow, all of them weeping tears of black blood that fell like rain. Daniel Crane, it said, and its voice was a symphony of whispers, each word spoken by a different throat. My faithful shepherd, you have done so well. The weeping mother stepped into the candlelight, and I could see the truth of what I'd been doing for 3 years. Each cleansing had been a summoning, each killed nun a component, in a vast ritual spanning decades. I hadn't been hunting demons, I'd been assembling them. The church knows, Mother Superior Agnes said, her voice filled with a mixture of horror and satisfaction. The cardinals, the Pope himself, they're all part of it. They've been feeding the weeping mother for over a century, nurturing her growth, preparing for the day when she would be strong enough to break free from the spiritual realm entirely. Why? I managed to gasp, though speaking was becoming increasingly difficult as the entity's presence pressed down on me like a physical weight. Because they believe it will bring about the end times, she said. The final battle between good and evil, with the church as humanity's savior. They think they can control her, use her as a weapon against their enemies. They don't understand that she's already won. The weeping mother moved closer, her many faces shifting and changing as she approached. You broke rule 2, she said, her composite voice filled with something that might have been affection. Upstairs, when you saw Mother Superior Agnes and felt confusion, you whispered a prayer. Our Father, give me strength. Such a small transgression, but the rules are absolute. I remembered the moment with crystal clarity now. The instinctive prayer had escaped my lips before I could stop it. A lifetime of religious conditioning overriding my training. Such a tiny mistake, barely a whisper, but it had been enough. The rules were never meant to protect you, the weeping mother continued. They were meant to guide you, to ensure you performed each step of the ritual correctly. Every death you caused, every soul you freed, it all led to this moment. But I followed them perfectly, I said. I did everything right. Except for one small mistake, she agreed. But that's all I needed. The rules have served their purpose, Daniel. They brought you to me at precisely the right moment, in precisely the right way. Now it's time for the final phase. She reached for me with hands that were shadow and ice, and where she touched me, my body began to change. The tattoos on my flesh writhed and moved, the Latin words rearranging themselves into new patterns, new meanings. I could feel my bones shifting, my face beginning the slow, agonizing process of rotation. The Vatican has been feeding us for over a century, she whispered, her voice now coming from inside my own head. Every operative they send becomes part of the greater work. Your predecessors are here, Daniel. They're waiting for you to join them. I could see them now, standing in the shadows between the pillars. Dozens of men and women, in the remnants of their gear, their faces turned backwards, their eyes weeping tears of black blood. They'd all followed the rules, just as I had. They'd all made one small mistake at the crucial moment. Agent Rodriguez, from the Texas monastery case, Agent Thompson, who'd disappeared in Maine, Agent Walsh, who'd been found drained in Oregon. All of them were here, all of them part of the Weeping Mother's growing collection. They reached for me with backwards hands, welcoming me into their fraternity of the damned. Their mouths moved in unison, speaking words that came from behind their heads. "Welcome home, brother. Welcome to the truth." The pain was incredible, as my skull cracked and reformed, the bones grinding against each other as they shifted into their new configuration. I tried to scream, but the sound came from behind me now, muffled and distorted by the transformation. 8 nuns, Mother Superior Agnes said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "The ritual is complete. The door is open. The faithful have been rewarded for their devotion." But that wasn't quite right, I realized through the haze of agony. There had only been 7 nuns at St. Agatha's. The 8th was... "You," the Weeping Mother said, reading my thoughts. "You were always meant to be the 8th, Daniel. The final component in a ritual that began before you were born. Your survival at the seminary wasn't chance. It was selection. You were marked that night, chosen to serve a purpose greater than your understanding." My vision was fragmenting now, reality splitting into multiple perspectives as my eyes adjusted to their new position. I could see the Weeping Mother from behind and in front simultaneously, could watch my own transformation from angles that shouldn't exist. "The Church thinks they've been using us," she continued, "but we've been using them. Every rule they carved into your flesh, every mission they sent you on, every death you caused, it all served our purpose. The Vatican believes they've been cultivating demons to serve as weapons in some final holy war. The truth is, we've been cultivating them." 8 nuns, the Weeping Mother said, her voice now indistinguishable from my own thoughts. "The ritual is complete. The door is open. The faithful have been rewarded for their devotion." But as the transformation neared completion, I began to understand something else, something that filled me with horror even greater than the physical agony. The Weeping Mother wasn't just collecting operatives. She was collecting their knowledge, their training, their intimate understanding of the Church's methods and weaknesses. Every agent who died here didn't just become part of her army. They became part of her intelligence network, providing her with detailed information about Section 7's operations, the Vatican's defences, the location of every holy site and religious relic that might pose a threat to her growing power. I was the 17th operative she'd collected. Through me, she now had complete knowledge of the Church's supernatural defences, their methods of demon hunting, their sacred protocols and blessed weapons. She had everything she needed to turn their own systems against them. The transformation completed itself with a sensation like drowning in reverse, as if I was being pulled up from the bottom of a deep, dark lake. When it was over, I understood everything. The purpose of the rules, the nature of my mission, the true meaning of faith. I had followed every rule perfectly, every rule except one, and that single mistake had been exactly what they wanted. But there was something else, something the Weeping Mother hadn't anticipated. The pain of my transformation had awakened something in my mind, a fragment of memory from the night at St. Bartholomew Seminary. The entity that had slaughtered my classmates had left something behind, a seed of knowledge that had been dormant for 3 years. As my consciousness merged with the collective intelligence of the Weeping Mother's army, I understood the final, terrible truth. The Church wasn't the victim in this cosmic game. They weren't even willing participants. They were prisoners. The real Vatican had fallen decades ago, consumed from within by entities that wore the faces of cardinals and bishops but served different masters entirely. The institution that had sent me on these missions wasn't the Catholic Church at all. It was something else, something that had been using the Church's authority and resources to feed an ancient hunger. The Pope himself was possessed, his body a vessel for something that had been old when Christianity was young. The College of Cardinals was a collection of demons wearing human faces, their minds linked to a hive consciousness that spanned continents. The entire hierarchy of the Church had been corrupted, turned into a machine for producing faith that could be harvested and consumed. Every prayer spoken in every church around the world fed the network. Every act of devotion, every moment of spiritual transcendence, every death in the name of God, it all flowed into the system, powering entities that had learned to feed on belief itself. And now I was part of it. My consciousness merged with the collective, my knowledge and experience adding to their vast library of human understanding. Through me, they could access everything I'd learned about faith, about hope, about the very nature of what it meant to be human. But they had made one crucial mistake. In absorbing my memories, they had also absorbed my trauma from the seminary. The night when I'd watched my friends die, when I'd been forced to confront the existence of true evil, when something had broken inside my mind and never quite healed. That trauma was like a virus in their system, a corrupting influence that they couldn't isolate or remove. Through it, I retained a fragment of my original self, a small corner of my consciousness that remained untouched by their influence. I was still Daniel Crane. I was still human, and I was still capable of choice. 3 days later, Montana State Police found St. Agatha's Convent empty. 8 nuns' habits were discovered in the chapel, all stained with what forensics determined to be human blood, though the specific type couldn't be identified. No bodies were ever recovered, despite an exhaustive search of the building and surrounding grounds. The official report blamed the disappearances on a potential gas leak that could have caused mass hallucinations and disorientation. The building was condemned and sealed, with plans to demolish it once the legal complications were resolved. But the building was never demolished. Instead, it became something else, a nexus point where the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Travellers on the nearby interstate sometimes reported seeing lights in the windows at night, or hearing the sound of singing coming from the sealed structure. The authorities dismissed these reports as imagination or optical illusions. They didn't understand that the convent had become a doorway, a permanent breach between dimensions that allowed entities to move freely between worlds. In Rome, the thing wearing Cardinal Toretti's face opened a new file and began composing orders for the next operative. The subject line read simply, Vermont, Monastery of the Sacred Heart, 9 monks possessed. But this time the orders were different. This time the entity had learned from its experiences with me. The new operative would be given additional rules, more specific instructions, tighter control over every aspect of the mission. They couldn't afford another mistake. They couldn't risk another agent retaining fragments of their humanity after transformation. The network was too close to completion, the final phase too important to jeopardize. Agent Sarah Mitchell received her assignment 3 weeks later. The tattoos were carved into her flesh with needles blessed in the blood of martyrs, each rule a chain that would bind her to their will. She was young, devout, perfect for their purposes. She had no idea that her predecessor was watching her from the shadows between worlds, waiting for the moment when she would make her own small mistake, her own tiny violation of the sacred rules. Because I had learned something in my transformation, something the collective consciousness hadn't expected me to retain. The rules weren't absolute. They could be bent, twisted, interpreted in ways that served different purposes. And if I could find other agents like myself, other fragments of humanity trapped within the network, maybe we could turn the system against itself. Maybe we could find a way to break the cycle, to free the church from the entities that had consumed it from within. It would take time. It would take patience. It would require sacrifices that I wasn't sure I was capable of making. But I was still human enough to try. In the depths of the sealed convent, something that had once been Daniel Crane stood guard over a doorway that led to spaces between spaces, watching and waiting for the next shepherd to guide the flock home. The weeping mother was patient. She had eternity to complete her work. But she had made one crucial error. In trying to transform me completely, she had given me access to the network itself. And through that access, I could see the full scope of her plans. The true extent of the corruption, the exact nature of the threat facing humanity. The faithful would continue to serve, believing until the very end that they were the hunters rather than the hunted, the saviors rather than the sacrifice. But some of them would remember, some of them would resist, and in that resistance there might be hope. The rules were absolute, the rules were perfect, but rules could be rewritten. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, a former seminary student who had once believed in goodness began to plan a revolution that would shake the very foundations of hell itself. The weeping mother had won this battle, but the war was far from over, and I intended to make sure she regretted ever teaching me the rules.